Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. We're glad that you join us today and look forward to having some good time of learning together, growing together, including seeking out wisdom. And today, we're going to seek out wisdom about how to seek out wisdom. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I'll give you the background of why here in a few minutes. As always, when we start off the show, I like to let people know how we see wisdom to start with, and we see wisdom as a process, a journey, and that journey goes in three basic steps, if you will. And the journey into wisdom starts with knowledge, and knowledge is something that we can pick up accidentally or learn on purpose or do so formally, some ways informally. There are just lots of different ways to pick up knowledge. And unfortunately, in our culture today, we have a lot of people that stop and say, that's all I need. And that's unfortunate. And we'll talk about that some more. Second step in this journey is to gain understanding. And gaining understanding is about taking knowledge we have and putting it into action in our lives and in our circumstances, figuring out how to solve problems and learning how to work with people and things and so on. And excuse me. And this is where we start personalizing our knowledge and making it appropriate to us and to certainly fit what we're doing. Hopefully, we learn from each time to apply the knowledge in a better way and in different circumstances. And then the third step in this process is when we go from understanding to wisdom. And it's a big step, and it's one that we miss so often because we're not aware or not intentional about wisdom. But this step is where we take our knowledge and understanding and we begin to uh, have used that in a bigger picture. We start seeing things outside of ourselves. We start seeing things in such a way that we look beyond our own personal effect, how it plays into our lives alone, but also to those around us and to a larger audience, to our community, and of course, ultimately to our world. And so, seeing our life and what we know and understand from that much bigger picture and outside of ourselves is when we have begun to gain wisdom. And that with that wisdom, the value is we begin to have the best chance to make the best choices in our lives. So I hope that you will join us on the journey to gaining wisdom, and that we can certainly share that together and grow together today as we cover the topic of how to seek wisdom. Welcome, Charles and Lee, Rick, Stephanie, Mohammed, Lydia, Prashant. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, correct me. Stephanie, let me know if you continue to have audio issues, and I'll check my end, make sure that things are not a problem on my end. So, give you a little background on why I chose this topic this week. As I was with a group of people recently, and we were having some discussion, and our discussion, the topic of wisdom came up, and one of the people in the group knew about this podcast and my intentionality about wisdom, and he said, "How do we seek wisdom?" And I thought, okay, that's a good question and something worth considering, because I'm encouraging you all to seek wisdom. So let's look at some of the understanding of how that works and to discuss it. And what I hope is that all of you will chime in and share what when you have been able to seek out wisdom, and not just when it has happened, because sometimes gaining wisdom happens to us rather than us seeking it out. But if you would share any of your stories about excuse me, seeking out wisdom and how you went about doing so, because there are different ways. And so, as we talked about, we start with knowledge. And interesting thing about knowledge is it can be facts and figures, as we learn reading books, watching TV, reading on the internet, different ways that we can pick up knowledge. You can pick up knowledge listening to other people or asking questions, talking to them. And so we want to start with that knowledge. And then there's another piece, and this is something that I know some of you may roll your eyes a bit. I don't know, but that's okay. We're different, and we can be different and be okay together. And that is learning, picking up knowledge through mental and emotional intuitiveness, and also spiritual insight that we have available to us. And just so, very straightforward, part of what we talk about on this podcast is that we are made up of three parts: a body, a soul, and a spirit. And we need to grow in balance in all of those areas. And to be honest, to really gain wisdom like we can and should, it has to involve all three components, including a spiritual component. In fact, one of the ways that I like to look at wisdom, and others that have a spiritual bent like to see wisdom and kind of give it context, is that wisdom is when we begin to see things through God's eyes. And begin to have that greater picture with one component, though, that's important, is seeing things through God's eyes and through love. And again, I know some people react as if that's kind of peculiar, because love is something that we don't understand a whole lot. In fact, we did a show recently in fact, last Monday, we did a topic on love and the importance and how it fits in all areas of our lives, including in our business world. So seeking out knowledge is important. And I know personally, I make it a point to learn something new every day. It doesn't have to be, learning some new grand scientific fact or something about the world or whatever. It can be small things, because as we are intentional about gaining knowledge, those small things begin to add up and the pieces begin to connect, especially as we seek out wisdom. So one of the practical aspects of seeking out wisdom is to learn every day and recognize that our learning can occur, doesn't have to be in any special situation. We can learn from most any circumstance if we're aware. We can learn from most any person, including, and this is something kind of a challenge for us, because we prefer to avoid people that don't like us, or in other words, we don't hang around with our enemies. But when we do encounter them, and if we are a wisdom seeker, we can gain knowledge and potentially wisdom even from those people. There have been reports throughout history of people learning from animals that were directed by God to give them a message. So being available, willing, able to learn is one of the key parts to seeking out wisdom, because it helps us to gain knowledge. And that's the first step in the process. And I just remind everyone is that that's not the destination. That's just the first step. We unfortunately have become cultures of knowledge being power. And I'm sure you've heard that before, that knowledge is power. Knowledge isn't power. Knowledge is good information, and it's helpful, and it's a good first step, but that doesn't give us power. We can have all the knowledge in the world, but if we don't know how to use it and don't know how to use it wisely, we're not powerful. In fact, I would suggest people that are only knowledgeable are probably pretty weak, because if you have too much knowledge and not have a good way to apply it and use it, then what's going to happen is you're going to make some really dumb mistakes. You're going to make some very poor choices. And so knowledge is great. It's a first step. So being intentional to learn knowledge from all sources and all times is part of the process of seeking wisdom. But keeping in mind, that's just the first step. Then the next step in this process, and again, I'm expanding on what I explained at the beginning of the podcast, but the next step in that process is we can get all kinds of knowledge. We can have a head full. In fact, now with the advent of Google and Siri and some of those different options, search engines, and so on, we have lots of knowledge at our fingertips. And I can even read the words and learn about how to split atoms. All right. And I can have the understanding in my head and even understand it to and have that knowledge there. But if I don't know how to take it and put it into action, then it is just a piece of information. Kind of interesting that we even have games in and around having knowledge. And I don't know if you've thought about this or not, but we have trivia games. And it's all about what kind of pieces of knowledge do you have that you can remember to talk about with people. But it's trivia. It's not power. And so taking this knowledge and begin to use it to help ourselves to grow or to do things better or to solve problems. I suspect many of you at some point in time have had a problem that you needed to solve, and you went to YouTube and searched out what, a question about what you need to solve. And you have taken and found videos and listened to them. And based on the knowledge you have coming in and the knowledge that's needed, then you begin to gain understanding of how to solve a problem. And another way that we use knowledge and change it to understanding is that, and again, I hope I'm not offensive in this comment, but if any of you are much of a learner in regards to communication, you know that different people communicate in different ways, especially between male and female people. There have been books written in regards to this. What is it? Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. We speak different languages, and knowing that there is a difference helps you to begin to have understanding. And the more that you dig into learning about communications, excuse me, welcome, Zaid, glad to have you. Then you start to have the knowledge about how to say words, and then you begin to apply that knowledge and gain understanding how to use the words in a way that will hopefully communicate effectively without making mistakes or to miscommunicate. And so that's when we move into the concept of understanding. We know that just because we can talk about gravity, if that's all the knowledge we have and the only use gravity for in our understanding, we're limited, because there's another piece of knowledge that is out there that's been demonstrated, and it's the law of our aerodynamics. So we know that from that knowledge that gravity affects us all the time, but it can be moderated or modified, if you will, by other laws, and using knowledge and applying that into understanding of how to use the piece of knowledge of law of aerodynamics to begin to overcome it through flight. So these are examples of going from knowledge to understanding. We can know, for example, and I know that I use this example a lot because it's a very effective in my life, and that is, I have knowledge of how to sing. I have knowledge of how to play instruments, and yet my understanding is limited to the point that I cannot, because of who I am, I'm not able to practically and to a good level play instruments or sing. I still like to sing and I would still like to play an instrument, but I know that is a limitation based on my design. And so I can gain all the understanding. I can study all the information and get the knowledge and even change it to understanding how to apply the notes on a music sheet and how to read that information. And but I may not be able to apply it completely. And so in this case, by the way, well, I'll come back to it. So gaining understanding is taking our knowledge and doing something with it. And by the way, I like that Lydia makes the comment that she agrees about intuition and the value of that, and knowing that we have intuition and then doing something with it are two different things. And we talk about, by the way, intuition, another name for it is gut. And it's something that we go on as we learn how to understand it. Many of us have experienced it, but we didn't understand it. So again, knowledge and then understanding. Let's see here. Let me share a couple of comments. By the way, I love your comments always. Love to hear your insights and thoughts. Zaid comments, I learned how to change my fuel pump from YouTube and learned also that I don't have the equipment to lift up my car. So I knew what the mechanic will do and he couldn't make up things to me. Okay, good way to take knowledge and gain understanding, if nothing else, so that you know that you're being treated honestly. Good idea. And so, yes, that's an example. Rick echoes the same kind of sentiment. YouTube is great. I use it a ton. Great for DIYers. For those that don't know, that's do-it-yourselfers. And yes, I am very accomplished at repairing and doing mechanical things, but I will tell you, I use YouTube a lot as well. When I get a different vehicle that I've not been acquainted with before, and I do a lot of my own work on my own vehicle, and I have found YouTube to be really, really helpful. And what's good, though, is the more knowledge I have about how vehicles work in general, then how I can use it to then apply it to specific vehicles is going from knowledge to understanding. I hope you can begin to see this progression. And one of the key things with this and seeking wisdom is intentionality. Many of us our challenge is that we are going through life and we want to be on autopilot because somehow that makes it easier, better, whatever. And that's a problem. And I will tell you, working and operating from autopilot, going through the motions and not being intentional and aware, we talk about awareness. And if we do that, we are missing many times to gain understanding and wisdom in our life. And so intentionality, the question is about seeking wisdom. And if you notice, seeking is an action. Okay. It's a verb. We are seeking. It means intentionally doing something. Many people just determine, or either by omission or commission, determine not to seek out wisdom. That's a choice. Now, will people gain wisdom who aren't seeking it? Yes, that it's been shown over time. That's also why we so often associate wisdom only with age. And some things take the age for it, but we were having, in fact, discussion in this group when we were talking about wisdom, that there are lots of people that are young that have gained lots of wisdom, that, and it's even to a point that it's notable because it's unusual for someone that age to have wisdom. And that's because whether they by choice or by life circumstances are forced to begin to go through the process of gaining knowledge, applying it, and then figuring out what it means to the bigger part of their lives. We're talking generally about people that have gone through adversities that are unique or unusual for their age. And that means, though, that if we as parents and grandparents help our young people to have awareness and be intentional and help them choose to seek out wisdom, they can be wiser at an earlier age. It does not require getting old to gain wisdom always. Some things, yes, it takes time and it will eventually come with age. But we have the option, if we truly seek wisdom, to gain it ahead of time. And by the way, we don't always have to gain wisdom through adversity, or at least not our adversity. And we'll talk about that some in a moment. So being intentional and aware to gain knowledge. So learning and being intentional about learning as much as we can all the time is of value. And there's also mental value in it, because the more we use our minds to gain knowledge on a regular basis, the healthier our brain stays, because we keep it active and functioning as it should by always looking to learn on a regular basis. And so seeking out the knowledge, then looking for ways, the understanding of how to use the knowledge in our lives and solve problems and help relationships and learn how to do things. Those are all part of that process. Thanks, Lee, for stopping by. And I always appreciate you being around, and hope that you go and find some wisdom, seek out some wisdom today. So anyway, then the third step in this process, and again, this is about intentionality and it's about choices, and that is to decide that we're going to take the knowledge and understanding we have gained and begin to see it from a different vantage point than just how it affects me and how it's going to do things in my life or change my life only. Because up to that point, if we are just doing that, we have not gained wisdom. We've gained understanding and learned a lot of things. But when we begin to say, okay, for example, you learn how to, as Zaid commented, learned about how to work on your car. And you can take that and you can apply it to your vehicle and either use it for understanding in that situation, not to be taken advantage of, or even if you get the tools and equipment and try, you can maybe learn how to do it for yourself. And that's a point of understanding. But what happens is when you move to wisdom in this example, you begin to say, how can I use this knowledge and understanding to benefit others? How can I share it with others because they're a part of my life? Sharing it with family, sharing it with friends. And as we do that, we are starting to move into the concept of wisdom, because we're now looking at what we have gained, knowledge and understanding, and begin to look at how does it affect others? How does it affect the world around me? And so on. That's when we start moving into wisdom. And that is when we start learning how to make different, most of the time, better choices. For example, in what Zaid shared, is he gained understanding by checking it out that he didn't have the equipment. And that's okay. But what we do at that point is we began to say, okay, is there a good reason? Would it be a good choice to get that equipment? And it's certainly something that we have to think about and something that we have to consider. And at that point, we make a choice whether to use that knowledge and understanding in such a way that it affects other people. And quite often, what we choose to do affects other people. We just don't consider it. And when we start considering others, we are beginning to move into the realm of wisdom in our lives. Because as we do that, for example, we might choose not to get the equipment to do this repair on our car, because we considered that if we start doing that, it could cause someone not to have enough work. Just an example or a possibility. And so as we move through this process of seeking wisdom, we are moving forward into an understanding of our life and how it impacts others. And one of the challenges that as we gain wisdom, is we start beginning to gain an understanding about ourselves and about our purpose. Because if we are intentional in seeking out wisdom, it becomes very important to understand who we are, what we are, how we're designed, and what our purpose is. Because we begin to consider how we, as a person, impact others, impact the world around us. So again, we have moved through the process of gaining knowledge, and then we talk about understanding and how to start applying it. And now we're talking about how to transition into wisdom. First key thing is intentionality. I want to gain wisdom. And that means choosing to put ourselves in a situation where we see things in a much bigger light, where we see what's going on in our world, but also how our world interacts or intersects with other people's world, and what are the consequences of the choices that we make in regard to that interaction. And when we start doing that, we are moving into gaining wisdom. And I will share my perspective, and it is my opinion, and I don't mean to be offensive in it, But I will suggest that to truly gain wisdom in its fullest, it requires a spiritual component in your life, because there are aspects of seeing ourselves and seeing the world around us, including the people around us, that it requires a spiritual component to fully get it. And the nice thing about a spiritual component, especially for those of us that live in a world that we recognize how impactful our spirit is, it's also helpful, because part of what our spirit can do for us in this process is that we can gain insights that can't be seen with our eyes, heard with our ears, or experienced with our senses. It's almost as if, I guess a way to put it, and now that I'm thinking about it, we're getting into a movie title and we're talking about a sixth sense. And I believe that we all have it if we are aware. I think we all have it. It's just that we're not all aware of it or willing to acknowledge the value of it. So the process, gain knowledge, learn many things, and then begin to make choices to apply what we know. And that means that we do well to gain knowledge that is a factor in our life. And as we grow in wisdom, it helps us to gain understanding of the knowledge that we should seek out. You can see that this is a cycle. It is part of a journey or a process. We don't go in and seek wisdom and we've gained wisdom on something and move on. It's not a once and done process. It's an ongoing, evolving process in our life. And the more that we gain this wisdom and perspective, insight, the value is it helps us to make better choices, because we have better insight to what our choices are, how our choices are going to affect us. What are the consequences? And when we're intentional about becoming wise, the wiser we get, the less often we have to learn by touching the hot object. We can learn from other people. We can gain wisdom from each other, but it's a part of an ongoing process. In order to gain wisdom from other people, we have to gain wisdom for ourselves to start with. Now, some people and again, young people in particular, if we teach our young people to value wisdom and to respect people that have been around a long time and have gained a lot of wisdom, not necessarily guaranteed, but more likely than not, people with age have gained wisdom. And if we want to be or make good choices in regards to it, we go to people and gain wisdom from them about things, so that we do not have to gain it always by adversity. Now, I will tell you that some wisdom I have learned is that adversity is not something to be avoided and not something that is harmful to us and therefore should be protected from. It's actually, adversity is a great teacher. And as we adopt a mindset of that and embrace our adversities, we will gain wisdom even faster, because when we embrace that adversity and go in with the right attitude, we are then looking at ways to understand our circumstances and apply the knowledge we've gained, as well as to gain insight into, okay, how does this fit in the bigger picture? Part of the reason people going through adversity get hopeless is because they have no concept of the bigger picture. They have not gained that bigger picture understanding. It's only about me and how it affects me and what it's going to do to me. And that's unhealthy and it's unwise. So again, seeking wisdom is recognizing the process that we go through to gain wisdom. And for those, again, of us who are spiritual, and I make it no secret that part of Wisdom Seeker podcast is I believe that the Bible holds a lot of wisdom in it, whether you agree with the tenets of faith. There's a lot of insight into there. And one of the things that the Bible says, if we lack wisdom, we should ask for it from our Creator. So again, another step and way to approach wisdom, gaining wisdom and seeking wisdom is to ask for it. And also, if you're going to ask for it, but you don't think it'll happen, don't bother. It won't work because you won't be looking for it expectantly. You'll assume it's not coming. So even if it does come, you'll miss it. So seeking out wisdom is a lot about being intentional, making choices, being aware. And the less that we operate in our life on autopilot, in other words, the less that all we're about is going to work, make money, come home, and spend time with the family. Nothing wrong with those things, but if that's what we're all about and we're doing it just the best we know how with what we are dealing with rather than seeking the wisdom in regards to it, the less we seek wisdom, the less wisdom we're going to have. And if we want to gain wisdom and choose to do it on an ongoing basis, then it will feed on itself. That's the beauty of becoming wise. Once you start the cycles of becoming wise, then we have gained more wisdom. Let's see. Zaid says, for some reason, I think the video started to replay itself. I had to refresh. I apologize if you're having issues, technical issues. I don't see indications of it on my end, but if y'all will keep me aware, and if I need to make an adjustment, I will, or if we need to call it a day on this topic and come back and revisit it, we'll do that. So thank you, Zaid, for letting me know. And so one of the ways, getting into practical elements of seeking wisdom, tips, if you will. One of those things, because being intentional, being aware is a key to seeking wisdom, is to go through the 40-day challenge that I have thrown out to wisdom seekers recently, again, to revisit. And that is using 3 steps. Number 3 is a good number, by the way, for lots of reasons. Fits us because we're 3 parts in one person. But the 3 steps are to disconnect. In other words, we have influences in our life that distract us from gaining wisdom. And when we begin to look at those things that interfere with our seeking wisdom, and we remove them from ourselves, or remove ourselves from them, depending on the circumstances, then we've made a first step. And when we disconnect from things, gives us additional time. So what do we do with this additional time? Then we make a choice to get off autopilot and to then start observing. Okay. In the past, I've done this and this, but I've never really thought about what are the implications, the consequences. So taking the time to observe our own life, both our inward life, what's going on, how are we in terms of health in our body, health in our soul, health in our spirit, and start observing and see if there's something that is unhealthy in those regards. And then observing outwardly. To give you an example of how this comes into play, I encourage you, for those that have routine in your life, which many of us have and want, I urge you to consider something. In your travels day to day, how much are you actually noticing? Welcome, Dr. Vimla. Glad to have you. So how much are you really aware of what you're doing as you go through your routine? And an example that brought this to mind for me was there's a road near my home that I drive on very regularly. And recently I had someone ask, well, have they changed this uh, part of that roadway and is it different? And I had to stop and go, I really cannot honestly say one way or another. And I could not consciously answer that question, not honestly anyway, to say, had there been a change? And that's an example of how we coast, how we do things. And I suspect, like myself, that you have had moments where you have been doing something and then in a few minutes later go, I'm not even sure what all I did just now. Years ago, I was driving, and I spend a lot of time driving over the years in my life. In fact, I have logged over 1 million miles driving. And one night, I was returning home from an activity, driving down a road that I'd driven down many, many times. Fortunately, it was pretty late at night, so what happened didn't turn out to be a problem. But I was going down the road and went through an intersection. There was a traffic signal there. And I got down past the intersection, and then I realized that I had just driven through a red light. And I was not aware of that traffic signal and that it was red until after I had gone through it. That's an example of being on autopilot. And as you can well imagine, I was very fortunate in that case not to have a lot of negative consequences. First and foremost, it didn't cause an accident and hurt someone, hurt myself. Second of all, it didn't end up causing me to get ticketed, which if I did, I deserved it. But what the problem that it helped me realize is I was coasting. I was going through the motions. And when we choose not to behave like that, we make better choices, such as stopping at the red light. That's kind of an analogy of what we're talking about here. Observing, see what's going on. Make sure you're aware of the red lights that you are encountering. Make sure you're aware of the influence and effect you're having on people around you, family, friends, or even impact on the community in terms of good stewardship of our planet. And are we making choices while we're going through life, even on autopilot, that could be better choices for all reasons, for all the people involved in our lives and even the well-being of our existence? So observe. We first start by disconnecting, removing distractions. And it doesn't mean that you have to disconnect from everything and go into sensory deprivation, although at times that's valuable. But it doesn't have to be that extreme. You can make a choice about one area that you disconnect from, and then the time you've saved from doing that, then take time to observe. And then once you start observing, you go, okay, I realized that running through that red light could have had really bad consequences, could have really created a big problem. And at that point, I start to make choices, wiser choices, to be sure, for example, that when I'm driving, and I did make that adjustment, by the way, to focus in on what I'm doing more when I'm driving. And that's a moment of gaining some wisdom that it's more important that I focus on my driving than whatever was distracting me in that moment. And though that's an example of moving through the process, the challenge is, in that case, it was not intentional on my part. What is intentional is when I choose to learn more about being safe in driving, learn more about vehicle controls and things like that that will help me be more focused and to choose wisely in how I do that. So first, we disconnect from distraction. Second thing we do is observe. And it doesn't necessarily, when we observe, it's not something we're necessarily going to see immediately. It could be, but it may be something that we have to watch over time. How is this working in my life? How is it affecting my life? And the wisdom comes in, how is it affecting the lives of other people? An example, I choose to live in an unhealthy fashion. Okay. And as a result, I get sick. And without wisdom, we say, that's my problem. It's not anyone else's. And it's a victimless choice. But wisdom will tell us that if we don't take care of ourselves and we get ill, it affects us, yes, but it affects many others. It affects our coworkers. It affects our family and our friends. It affects, if we get ill, whatever our purpose is, begin to diminish or go unmet. So disconnect, observe, and then seek out wisdom about these things in our lives. That's some practical tips. And there are different practical approaches to implement seeking wisdom. One of them, and Anton and I talk about this on the Human SOS show, and that is meditation and prayer. Great opportunity to observe our lives and observe what's going on inside and out. Another one is figuring out what for us is a way to spend time reflecting. Yoga, walks in nature and creation. Some of us, sometimes it is some kind of activity. And we each have different ways that we approach that and different activities that are appropriate to us. It's funny because one of my greatest challenges from a character standpoint, but also one of my greatest blessings is actually driving. Because there are times that when I want to reflect, that it helps me to go out, and I have to be wise in my choice, go out in more isolated areas and drive around, and it allows me to safely observe and think about what I see and what's going on. And it can even help me deal with stress. On the other hand, if I get in the car and I'm in traffic somewhere, it's exactly the opposite. The point is that I have learned the wisdom to know the difference between the two and the circumstances. So, again, look at different ways to give yourself a chance to be reflective or introspective, and with the purpose of gaining wisdom. See, seeking wisdom is a purpose. It's a choice, if you like, it's a goal. And define it and pursue it. And so another way we learn is to spend time with other people that we know to have gained wisdom. I had a friend tell me how that they regularly go and spend time with older family members for the very purpose of gaining insight, gaining wisdom from these people. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they go in and quiz these people, but they take the time to be around them and listen and observe. And, there's a reason, by the way, that by design, we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. And a good way to help seek out wisdom is to keep our mouth closed more often. That's been a hard lesson for me, and I'm still learning how to do that. That just because the circumstances allows doesn't mean I need to open my mouth and say something. And learning when to say and when not to is important. And I find that one way for me to seek wisdom is to go and just sit, listen, and observe. And as I do that, I gain insights. If nothing else, in a certain situations, I gain insight into how to be social with a group of people. And going into networking situations, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a mouth. Learn to listen, learn to observe. So again, different ways to begin to seek wisdom practically. One is to decide that we want to gain wisdom. It is not something, it is something that we can get passively, just like we can passively get knowledge and passively get understanding. The difference being, if we passively learn about how hot objects burn us, okay, we gain the knowledge. Somebody has told us, we've read about it. It says if you touch hot objects, it's going to harm you. That's knowledge. And we understand the words, but then if we go and we touch hot objects, we experience and gain understanding about how hot objects burn. And we begin to realize that, hopefully learn. Some people, they like to keep touching the hot objects, and it unfortunately has bad consequences. But as we begin to learn about not touching hot objects, and by the way, sometimes we have to be interacting with hot objects, but we begin to learn ways to interact with those hot objects without getting burned. At that point, we're starting to gain wisdom and applying it in our lives. And that's what causes us to then see people starting to touch hot objects, and we say, hey, don't do that. Because now we're thinking about how hot objects can hurt other people. So practical tips: be aware, be intentional. One of the processes that I like and encourage people to consider is to disconnect from whatever's distracting us. Take that time we've saved to observe, and then through our observation, seek out wisdom in regards to what we observe. Dr. Vimla echoes that she likes to drive too. We get time and space to introspect and experience an unknown path. Yes, sometimes our driving our vehicle is a help to exploring. And when I travel, there are many times when I have the discretionary time to do so, I like to explore. I like to get off the beaten path to learn and to indeed introspect. So, and for each of us, there are different ways to do it. Some of us, again, like I mentioned, yoga, meditation, prayer, reading. Sometimes it's a matter of just getting in a quiet place. For some of us that stay in a quiet place, it may be that we need to make a choice to get in a noisy place with other people. All of it's about with the intent to find wisdom in our lives. So seeking wisdom is put that way for a reason, because the sooner and more we seek out wisdom, the more we're going to find, and as a result, make wiser choices, which will lead to more wisdom. And so it's an interesting process, and it's not accidental. It is very purposeful. Let's see. So you guys are getting the traffic light story multiple times. Makes me wonder if someone out there needs to hear that and needs to be paying more attention when they're driving. I don't know, but I apologize again. On my end, everything seems to be working. and I monitor. By the way, I know I look around at times, but I'm actually monitoring two screens. I'm monitoring the live stream that we're on, but I'm also observing the stream as it appears on LinkedIn to make sure, that things are rocking along. So must be some technology bugs out there that are bugging us today. Hopefully it's not creating a problem for a lot of people. So seeking wisdom, how do we do it? First of all, awareness and intentionality. I think it's also important that we begin to understand wisdom comes from ultimately being healthy in all areas of our makeup as a human. All three areas: our body, our soul, and our spirit. And the more we're healthy in those areas, the more likely we are to find wisdom sooner and better. And that's another part of this whole understanding of seeking wisdom. The other is that we are intentional in seeking, making choices for ourselves that help us to go through steps and processes to seek and to find wisdom. We can say we're seeking it, but if we aren't expectant to find it, we are not going to gain the wisdom. Many times we miss a lot in life because we've decided it can't be or won't be. I'm convinced that many times we miss a lot of miracles that occur in our lives and the lives of others because we've decided miracles don't happen. And it's just like if you go looking for, I don't know, you're looking for gold. Well, if you don't think you're going to find gold, you're not going to likely find it because you're not going to be expectant. You're not going to have an attitude of, I can find this and I will find it, and therefore putting forth the effort to do so. So wisdom's the same way. In fact, again, wisdom from the Bible says that gaining wisdom is better than, more valuable than gold or silver or jewelry or money or wealth or any of those things. So I hope that this has been helpful today. And I'm hoping to share this with this friend that asked the question of how do you seek wisdom? And I appreciate all of you being here today and sharing along the way with some of your thoughts. What I hope you'll walk away from is you will become very intentional as a wisdom seeker. In fact, I hope that you are following the hashtag and help us to get more people in. By the way, in case you don't know, one of the values of hashtags and following them is that when that hashtag appears, that information becomes a part of the digital landscape. And if you even go to Google or on LinkedIn or any of the social media sites and you actually click on a link to a given hashtag, it will help you find material that is included when that hashtag has been added. And try it out sometime. Click on hashtag wisdom seeker or hashtag wisdom nugget. And on LinkedIn, you will find a lot of content out there that is about wisdom. And so hashtags aren't just a popularity thing. They are actually have a practical application. So please, I ask you to consider seeking wisdom out and do so. Try some of the tips that we brought up today, whatever is appropriate for you, but please be very intentional about seeking wisdom, not for my sake, but for yours and the sake of the people in your lives and how you impact them, so that as you grow and go, you will gain wisdom and make better choices along the way and become wiser in the process. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate you being here today. My apologies that apparently we've had some technical glitches along the way, and I'll do my part to see if I can make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. Have an amazing week. Be blessed by God, and use your time and become a wisdom seeker so that we can all benefit from each other's wisdom. Thank you, everyone. Take care. We will see you next week on Monday morning, 8 o'clock, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Thanks, everyone. Bye.